Hey guys, Brox here, bringing you my Stormclaw Druid build. This is probably my most requested build that I've had this season. It is capable of hitting for over 1 million damage. We're at 1.2 million at the moment, but we can push it even further than that as our glyphs are not maxed out. So there's probably potentially somewhere in the 1.5 to 1.7 million range for the damage threshold. In reviewing this build, a lot of people have asked me to kind of go through it. What am I doing? How am I doing it? So I'm going to bring that to you. Before we get started, I want to preface this video. I'm going to start doing this in all my videos before going into these builds, is to let you know I do deep dive these builds. So a lot of people have told me that my videos are really long and asked me, is there a way I can shorten them up? In truth, I don't really want to, because I'm not here just to give you a quick run through of the build and then you struggle with the challenges that may come from it. I like to explain the theory behind the build, how we got here to the build, what challenges does the build have, what strengths does the build have, what is the build accomplished, and kind of give you the walkthrough of how everything's supposed to work. In that, I tell everybody, usually post the video being done, but I'm going to tell you in the video up front, turn the video speed up to 1.5 or 1.75. I natively talk really kind of monotone and kind of at a streamlined pace, which is really good for using YouTube's speed up feature, because you won't lose my cadence and you'll be able to hear me just fine. It'll cut down the video watch time considerably and you won't lose missing any of the context. So I just want to put that out there at the very start. Watch this video at 1.75 or 1.5 times speed. You'll get everything at a much faster pace, but it is something where I do want to go through these contexts. I also am not a content creator. I don't monetize these videos. I've never monetized a video on this channel. This is just a hobby for me. I work a full-time job, which is why this takes some time for me to get these videos out and actually get these characters built. So I just wanted to overview that in a little bit of context for people who look at the video length of my videos. With that being said, I want to jump into this one and kind of go through how we got here. So at the start of this video, you saw some clips of the Druid hitting for well over 1 million damage. I have not ran this build to Doriel yet. I have not ran this build to Uber Lilith yet. And I have not ran this build through a Nightmare 100 yet. Those are all things I wanted to do before putting this build together, but I've had so much request for wanting to see this build and wanting to understand this build that I'm going to put those off and do those as potentially a separate video of this build killing Uber Lilith, Duriel, which I don't think he's going to, like, this build's not going to have any trouble with Duriel. Uber Lilith is just me learning the mechanics of the fight. I've never fought Uber Lilith. And a Nightmare 100 should be doable at this stage. I did a Nightmare 84 or 85 with relative ease. And that was before some of the major upgrades that I did today. So a Nightmare 100 should be achievable with this build with relative ease, now that all the glyphs are at least to level 15. And we got a major roll on my necklace finally. So to get started, taking a look at the build, we are running around 13,000 attack power, 10,000 base armor in werewolf form, which is 98% armor. Now you may be asking, like, 85% is the cap. Why are you overcapping armor? That is because at 150, the mobs negate an armor percentage. So we are overcap for fighting monsters at level 100, but we are not overcap fighting monsters at level 150. Having it be around 10,000 means that disobedience, when it's up, will push it into the threshold, which should keep us around physical cap when we're fighting the Nightmare 100 monsters. That's why I was saying that I think this build shouldn't struggle going into Nightmare 100, because we're at a good armor threshold to be able to do that fight without any challenges. Additionally, our life is right around 12,000. This is a little low. I'm missing life on my ring, which could bump us up to around probably 13 to potentially 14,000. I play this on softcore. I will put this out there. This current setup of this build is to maximize the damage output of the build. It is not designed for hardcore. You would have to make some alterations to make this work in hardcore. Probably the biggest alteration I would probably assume you would want to make is turning Debilitating Roar into a werewolf skill so that you can use that and you know, keep yourself alive. There's also the potential of changing the build entirely to support Bulwark, but again, I'm not in hardcore on this character. Dying to me is just me pushing the threshold to how far can this build go. So it's not something where I'm too concerned about death on this build. This is more of a softcore, fun time, big numbers, right? Like we're just trying to see how big we can get the numbers for something on a Stormclaw build. But this is still missing some areas where we could add life if we needed more survivability. Life really doesn't come into play too much on this build unless you're getting one shot by map modifier mechanics, like the lightning strike modifier. That can one shot us if we get hit, because we don't have enough life to tank it. So if this was like 20,000 life, you could probably tank the lightning bolt. But I have been one shot by the lightning bolt at this life threshold. We're running about 300 strength, 450 intelligence, a beautiful 666 on the willpower for our Diablo game, and 475 in dexterity for an extra 9.5% critical chance. Alright, to run through the gear, we're going to be using Tempest Roar. Tempest Roar is going to allow our storm skills to also act as werewolf skills. That is because we are going to be using the Grizzly Rage ultimate, and we're going to be using the Dire Wolf's aspect to convert Grizzly Rage into a Dire Werewolf. So we are running a Grizzly Rage build, and that is so that we can take advantage of the 200% multiplicative modifier of Grizzly Rage, which is a huge damage increase. So that's where Tempest Roar comes into play, so we can use our storm skills while in Dire Werewolf form. This also provides us 40% poison resistance, which, you know, if you've been playing Season 2, the two primary bosses that people are farming, Varshan and Duriel, are both poison-based bosses. So poison resistance is the most prominent resistance to have this season. I'm sure that's bound to change, but generally, if you had any focus for resistance this season, it's to have poison capped. It also provides us critical strike damage for damage while shapeshifted, so we're going to be a werewolf the entire time. We're always going to be shapeshifted, so we're always going to get that damage benefit. Maximum spirit doesn't do us any value, so that's a loss of an affix, unfortunately, because, you know, we could have had a better roll here for like CDR or life, which would have been better. But this is a perfect 925 item level, so I have Tempest Roar. Then we're also going to be running Mad Wolf's Glee. Mad Wolf's Glee is going to allow us to be in werewolf permanently and +3 ranks to all of our werewolf skills. We are converting everything to a werewolf skill. So all our storm skills are werewolf skills and our werewolf skills are werewolf skills. So this is +3 ranks to everything, which is awesome. It's going to really increase our claw output and damage. It also provides movement speed, it provides flat damage, it provides some life, and then it provides damage reduction to poison enemies. This is going to be a big factor of some additional damage reduction, so we're actually going to make use of every affix on this piece of gear, which is good for us. This is a really good solid piece of gear, where normally you would want like a 4 DR roll on chest. This isn't bad for us. We get a bunch of things that we can actually make use of. For our gloves, this is one of the more perfectly rolled pieces of gear that I have. It could be probably slightly better. Lightning critical strike damage could be converted to some other form of damage output because it only affects certain things that happen, procs that we have. But as far as like the other modifiers and affixes on this, this is one of the best pieces of gloves that I've gotten so far. So we're looking at 14.4% attack speed increase, 10.5% increased critical strike chance, lightning critical strike damage, which happens on certain of our abilities, Storm Strike being the most prominent one, and then 15.3% lucky hit chance. And that's going to help us proc some important things specifically within our boons. and help keep our Grizzly Rage or our Dire Werewolf form active as often as possible. We're also going to be using Edgemasters here, which is going to give us a 20% multiplicative increase 100% of the time because it's a basic attack build, so we're going to be at full resource all the time, so it's just a free 20% multiplicative. We're going to be running a 3DR and armor pants, so flat damage reduction to close enemies, and damage reduction to distant enemies. One of the things that I'll cover in just a moment is damage reduction from distant is actually one of the things we have to be careful of because we're really tanky up close, but distant enemies can really hit us really hard, considering we don't have a lot of ways to mitigate distant damage. So getting some damage reduction from distant is actually really helpful. And then total armor, obviously, to help push us so that we can have armor cap in the higher nightmare levels. This is also a perfectly rolled disobedience to, again, push our armor up further. And then for the boots, this is a perfectly rolled set of boots. I can't believe I finally got one of these. This took me a while to get. But this is move speed after killing an elite, so to move very, very fast. Total armor while in werewolf form, so again pushing our armor value up, and then plus 60% a perfect roll for cold res, and I'll explain kind of how resistances and resistant capping works in just a moment on this build. We're also going to be taking the attacks reduce evades cooldown by 1.2 seconds. Because we're using Metamorphosis, this is the best implicit you can use because it's going to keep Metamorphosis up pretty much all the time. And you can kind of weave in and out of damage the entire time that you have it available to you, which is, again, the perfect implicit on the perfect set of boots. And this also has a perfectly rolled Ghost Walker. So while unstoppable, we're going to get 25% increased move speed, and we can move freely through enemies. So this set of boots is as good as it gets, truthfully. Then, of course, we're going to be using the Great Staff of the Crone. This is the only one I've had drop so far for me, so it is what it is for me. It's perfect non-physical damage. It's perfect on damage to close enemies. It's alright for damage to controlled enemies. And then it's perfect on the +9 ranks to claw. So we got max ranks to claw. The only thing that's down on is the percentage value increase on the actual aspect, which is only at 132%, which is a little low. It'd be great if that was 150, because then the staff would be absolutely busted. And then, of course, in this, we're going to use basic skill damage gems. And then on the gear, we're not using life gems, actually. So we're going to use damage taken over time reduction. And I'll explain why in just a moment, because there's some reasons why I do this. Over here for the amulet, this is as good as an amulet gets for me so far. One of the affixes I would change, but I'll go through that with you as we go through it. So this is only an item level 600 amulet. I have yet to find something even close to this amulet in many levels. But it comes with all res, movement speed again after killing an elite. We want to just constantly be moving very quickly. There's a reason for that as well. Being in a melee build, moving quickly is really important for getting out of mechanics and dodging AoE attacks. Ultimate skill damage is the affix I would change. It's not terrible for us, but it's not great either. What this should be, if you wanted the perfect amulet, would be cooldown reduction. And if you felt your movement speed was overcapped at this stage, you could also take out the movement speed 4 seconds after killing an elite, and you could put in some sort of flat damage increase. So if you wanted damage while in werewolf or flat damage, you could put flat damage here, flat damage while in werewolf, or critical strike damage, whatever would fit or socket into the affix slot, you could actually make use of if you just wanted more damage. But considering we're hitting for, upwards of 1.2 million, damage isn't really the thing I would want here. Cooldown reduction is really important because that will help us keep our Grizzly Rage active as often as possible, but also our Hurricane active is also as often as possible, because Hurricane is one of our damage reduction sources. And then, of course, we're taking total armor while in werewolf again. Again, the more armor we can push up natively while in werewolf form, the higher nightmare dungeons we can actually take on, knowing that we can be closer to that physical damage threshold cap. That's really important for us because we're a melee build. So we're in the thick of it, and we don't want to die from getting hit by, you know, just mobs with melee attacks. I have an almost perfect rapid aspect here. Obviously a perfect rapid would be primo. We're off by about 3%. And this would give us more attack speed. So basic skills gain 42% attack speed. This could be 45. We use basic skills as our primary damage source. So we just attack very, very, very fast. And we're going to talk about how we attack even faster than that. But the cool part about this build is, unlike the other Stormstrike builds that you may be used to that hit for around 90,000 to 120,000 damage, we're going to be hitting for, you know, anywhere from 250 to 1.2 million damage, but we're not losing any of the benefits of that other build. We're going to be attack speed capped and move speed capped pretty much the entire time, so we're not trading off anything. We're not losing attack speed for damage. We're not losing move speed for damage. We're just prioritizing damage. The one thing you could say is that we're somewhat trading survivability off for damage by not having a barrier in this build, not having bulwark in the build, or not having debilitating roar in the build. But in truth, if you play correctly, you shouldn't die, but death is always on the table with this build just because our life pool isn't, you know, at 20,000 and we're not using a barrier that, you know, moves our life all the way up to like 40,000 effective health, right? So yes, you are taking a little bit of risk on the defensive side by having lower life. That is the one kind of trade-off for not playing this as a hardcore build. But if you just want some fun in softcore and you don't really care about dying once in a while to like silly stuff, which I'll go over in just a moment, like some things to kind of watch out for in this build, then you'll enjoy it. It's a blast. So rings, we're going to use all res and then whatever your secondary resistance is, and we're going to play around that, and I'll go over that in just a second. Crit chance, damage to close enemies, damage to distant enemies. Those two are very important, and they need to be on both rings because they apply to your Thunderstruck legendary node on your Paragon board, which I will also go over in a minute so that that makes sense. But both rings need those two rolls, and as high as you can get those rolls, because those percentages, those flat additive percentages, will turn into multiplicative percentages, which helps us drastically push our damage threshold up. And then max life is the perfect roll for this ring. So this is a perfect ring. This ring has all four of the exact rolls you want on both rings. My next ring, however, because I'm playing softcore, I allowed it to stay a damage-oriented fourth affix, which I'll go over in just a second. But theoretically, I should roll it to maximum life, but I haven't done that yet, and it's just because I haven't felt the need to. This one is also rolled with a perfect rampaging werebeast. So while in Grisly Rage, our duration is increased by 5 seconds, and then the active critical strike damage goes up by 10% times multiplicative for the duration, up to a maximum of 200%. As we're in Grisly Rage, our damage, our attack power is going to just natively go up once we start critically striking. But also, the cool part about Grisly Rage is Grisly Rage natively also increases its damage over its duration. Damage bonus of being in Grisly Rage is increased by 3% each second while you're in Grisly Rage, and then kills extend the duration by 1 second up to 5 additional seconds. With the boon, that's 10 additional seconds, so that we're in Grisly Rage roughly around 28 seconds. So we're going to get a very large percentage increase to our attack power. So if I was to pop Grisly Rage, if you watch my attack power, I think this reaches all the way up to like 23,000 by the end of the duration. There we go. I was like, why isn't it moving? So if you watch it without critically striking, this is just native Grisly Rage attack power increase. So I'm actually going to let this go the full 27 seconds. So you see, so we peaked around 20,000, 21,000 attack power. So And that would actually go higher because we're not killing anything. We're not getting those additional 5 seconds. So probably more along the lines of like 20, like I said, 23, 25,000, somewhere in that ballpark is going to be the attack power cap before we start adding this 200% multiplicative from all the critical strikes we're going to do. Next ring is going to have, again, the same exact rolls: critical chance, damage to close enemies, and damage to distant enemies, which are the priorities. And then you can kind of supplement here. I left the roll it came with was critical strike damage, and because I was chasing damage, I didn't feel the need to change this at this point, but theoretically, the best roll you would want to have on here is a max rolled max life, because then, yes, you could start hopefully tanking some of the map modifier mechanics like the lightning strike and all that other stuff. You could start ignoring some of that. But because of what I was trying to do with this build and just having fun with the build, I actually just left the critical strike damage. I've actually even been considering just rerolling the critical strike chance and seeing if I can get that to go to 7.5%. Because the additional roughly 4% critical strike increase would be nice to have, on the build, just raising our critical strike chance up even more. This is obviously going to come with an almost perfect rolled Dire Wolf's aspect, and that is going to shape us into a Dire Wolf, and it's going to give us 24% movement speed instead of damage reduction, which roll can damage reduction, and 48% spirit cost reduction. In addition, kills heal us for 10% of our maximum life. We don't really need any of those stats, truthfully. We don't need the 24% move speed. We're going to be moving at 200% movement speed from all our other movement speed resources pretty much consistently. And we don't really need the spirit cost reduction because we're not using any spirit dumps like shred in the shred variant of this, or the poison claw variant where you shred. We're not using that. So theoretically, this is kind of a dead aspect to me. However, the heal for 10% of your maximum life on kill is huge, and being in dire werewolf form so that we can have Grizzly Rage is also huge because it's a massive damage multiplier. So that's why we use this. And in the written build guide that will be in the description below, you will notice that I put poison as the jewelry socket gem of choice. That is only there because, as I mentioned before, poison is the primary resistance you want capped to do any of the primary bosses this season. Lightning would be secondary because Gregory, the living steel boss, is a lightning boss, but he barely does any damage even with his lightning attack, so it's kind of a non-factor. But obviously, if you were going to target shadow resistance, poison resistance, and lightning resistance are your kind of 3 big primaries. Fire only really matters in nightmare dungeons where there's a lot of fire modifier mechanics and a lot of fire elite mobs that can be annoying, but that kind of comes secondary unless you're doing a big nightmare dungeon grind. And then cold damage it doesn't really do a ton of like damage. It's just an annoying CC kind of effect. There's not a ton of cold damage nukes in the game at this point, or map modifiers that will one-shot you from cold damage. So you don't really need to worry about cold. I would say cold damage is like your least important thing. But back to the kind of my point, in the written guide, you'll see it says poison. That's not my telling you to use poison in all 3 slots. This is very important. You'll notice in mine, I don't even use poison in any of my 3 slots because my poison is capped from my Tempest Roar and from Paragon points that are distributed on my Paragon board that kind of cover me on getting to cap on my poison res, and then of course all resistances, right? So 15% to all elements, 12% to all elements, and then 12% again to all elements. So I don't need poison res because of my Tempest Roar in my jewelry sockets. You'll actually see that I have a distributed color set here because each one of these gives 30%, right? So 30% to my shadow, 30% to my lightning, and 30% to my fire is going to push all of those considerably up so that they can be either at cap thanks to other things like the secondary implicit here for 12% fire resistance, the secondary implicit here for 12% more of fire resistance, plus the 30% fire resistance here will help us get us to or near that 70% cap. Now, I have been toting this since before the season started, and I will tote it here in this video. I think resistances are a little lame when you have flat damage reduction still in the game, because flat DR really kind of negates the purpose for resistances in a way. It's just kind of a nice to, you know, have the flat DR only have to affect 30% of the damage coming in. So it is still nice to have resistances, but I feel like if you have a good enough flat DR, resistances are still kind of a non-factor as they were at launch. So in my opinion, they should just remove flat damage reduction, period, and just work around armor and resistances and kind of tune the game around those two things, because flat DR kind of ruins the point of both, you know, just standard resistances and looking at resistances in an ARPG. Flat damage reduction to me is just silly. But nonetheless, we do have our resistances to, again, kind of the important ones. Fire resistance, because I've been doing Nightmare Dungeons to level glyphs. I've capped my lightning res. I'm not really doing Grigori right now, but it's at 52.8%. Cold res is capped thanks to our boots, and with that 60% roll. And then again, the all resists from the ring and the amulet will keep cold resist cap. Poison is capped because of the Paragon and the Tempest Roar. That's where the other rolls come in, right? So that's where the lightning resistance here in our jewelry is coming into play, and that's where our shadow resistance here is coming into play to get us to that 52.8 for both of them. If you are worried and you're like, oh my gosh, you know, I want to grind Nightmare 100s, I need to make sure I have everything capped out, that's actually really easy. You don't have to change anything on my build guide. You don't have to change any affixes in the build. You just go make a Elixir of Magic Resist. You should be able to make a ton of these, and it increases all your all resist by plus 25%, and pretty much overcaps all of this, right? It's not going to actually push it over the cap. It's not like a additive increase to the cap, but it will cap out both the shadow resist and the lightning resist. So I'll just show you. Boom, right? So now for 45 minutes, you can do whatever you want. You don't have to worry about changing anything about the build. You just go make one of these elixirs and, you know, go blast for 45 minutes and you'll be fine. So don't sacrifice damage for resistances in this build. You don't need to do that. Everything that I have written in the guide will keep you at this 70% with just one elixir use if you needed it. I don't really think you need it. We're super tanky as is. But again, if you're like Nightmare 100, that's all I want to do all day, every day, just go make an elixir and you'll be at cap for all your resistances. All right, let's talk about the new system. So the vampiric powers. So the vampiric powers we're going to be using this season are going to be Ravenous. Of course, this is one of the most broken powers in the entire game. You'll see the current bonus of me standing still is 62.3% increase in attack speed. And you've seen all the modifiers to movement speed that we have. So this will always be at the cap, which is 80% whenever we're running through, and it procs on that lucky hit. That's why we have lucky hit on the gloves, is to help us proc this 80% attack speed bonus for that time period. Again, we're not really ever sacrificing attack speed in this build. We have a ton of it natively from our amulet at that 45%. And then with this proccing, we are over the attack speed cap. So as long as this is proccing every now and then, you will be attacking at attack speed cap the entire time. We're using Metamorphosis. This is another means of unstoppable since we are not using Earthen Bulwark. We have two ways to kind of get out of jail free. One is proccing Grisly Rage, which will give us unstoppable for 6 seconds. The other is to use Metamorphosis, which is a much more reliable means to consistently get out of a situation. So this is almost a must-have since we're not running Earthen Bulwark, as another means to get out of CC effects that's more readily available than Grisly Rage is. We're also going to be using Undying. This is a staple to the build. This is how we are living through the entire anything. And what's really neat about this is it will proc even if you are standing still and hitting nothing. So all it cares about is casting the skill. It doesn't care about doing damage or hitting an enemy. So if you get really low on health and all the enemies around you are dead, you do not want to go into the next pack with your health low to try to hit an enemy to restore your health. You literally can just hold down your attack and it will fill your health bar back up. I can actually probably demonstrate that. So let me go demonstrate what I mean. So if we go and we're going to let some enemies hit us real quick, this is how tanky we are. We get away from them, right? So let's say you took some damage, you're in a nightmare, 90 speed run or something, you took some damage. You do not need to run in and try to hit mobs with this. You literally can just hold down claw and you will heal back to full before you engage the next mob pack. This goes the same with if you're taking damage over a time damage, just hold down claw and claw will mitigate the damage over time damage that you're taking because it's basically counteracting the damage you take by giving you 3% more damage back. So this is what is making this build so strong this season. This build will fall down many tiers when this season ends if this vampiric power system goes away. So if this system goes away and they don't retain it for next season and Undying goes away, this build drops down considerably because then you will have to start finding other ways to heal yourself that this one vampiric power is providing us. We're also going to use Sanguine Brace. That is going to give us Fortify when we kill an enemy. So that's great, more damage reduction. And then it's also going to give us 8% more critical strike chance, which is also great as an additive. So we're going to use Moonrise because, of course, Moonrise is using our basic skills to increase our attack speed for 10 seconds up to 5 times. That's a 20% attack speed increase. And then upon reaching the 5 stacks, we're going to empower ourselves with Vampiric Blood Rage, and we're going to gain 160% multiplicative basic skill damage, which would you believe is a great thing for us considering we're using 2 basic skills. And we're going to gain more movement speed, which is going for 10 seconds, which is going to again amplify Ravenous. So you can see how these all kind of interconnect with each other so that we can get more damage and more speed at all times. So we're going to again be movement speed capped at all times. We're going to have a ton of extra damage at all times. We're going to be able to heal at all times. And we're going to have max attack speed at all times thanks to these vampiric powers. Again, this build is really amped for this season, so I'm gonna be sad to see what it happens in season 3. But these are the powers that we are using. For our spirit boons, we're going to take damage reduction from elites. We're going to take 10% increased attack speed. We're going to take 5% increased critical strike chance. And then we're going to take the duration of our ultimate skills by 25% so that Grisly Rage lasts longer. And, again, that 3% damage increase lasts longer. And then we're going to also take the Calm Before the Storm, which is a lucky hit with our gloves, helping amplify this. A lucky hit that nature magic skills have up to a 10% chance to reduce our cooldown of our ultimate skill by 2 seconds, so that Grisly Rage can come up as quick as possible once it goes on cooldown. The current cooldown is roughly, I think, around 21 seconds, if I remember correctly, from the 50 seconds. Once we get through the 27.5 second window that we're roughly in, we'll be around that 22 second mark. So we do have to have this proc a couple times to help us really get that back up. And again, if we could get cooldown reduction on our amulet, that really helps, right? Because then we can be in Grisly Rage pretty much as often as possible, thanks to Calm Before the Storm and the cooldown reduction that we could have on our amulet that we don't. If you find yourself at attack speed cap all the time, you could swap the attack speed to more damage, which is, again, another way that we could boost our damage on this ridiculously high damage build already. But that is another way that you could actually eke out some more numbers if you wanted to. But because as we ramp Moonrise and we ramp all these additional damage sources like Ravenous and Moonrise, our base attack speed is only that 45% from our amulet plus this 10%, which is 55%. So it's not capped right from the get-go. It's only capped once we get Moonrise online, and then once we proc Ravenous, right? So that's how we're going to get to the cap. So it is nice to have that additional 10% to help ramp into our procs that we need to cap out attack speed. But again, if you want to just keep the 45 instead of the 55 attack speed and go for more damage, you absolutely can. All right, so if we jump over, we're not going to take a look at the Paragon board just yet. We're going to take a look at the skills. So this is going to look very similar to most Stormclaw builds with some minor changes. So obviously we're going to be taking Claw. We have 17 ranks in Claw thanks to the Crone Staff and from our, I think it was the Mad Wolf's Gleas. So it's Mad Wolf's for the +3 ranks here, and then from the Crone Staff +9 ranks there, and then the 5 from just putting it in the skill itself is going to give us 17 ranks in Claw, which is a ton of ranks. We're also going to take our Claw attack speed is increased by 15%. So now our base attack speed is, what did I say, was 55%. So now it's 70% base. And then Claw has a 15% chance to attack twice. When you have 17 ranks into something, having it attack twice is fantastic. Then we're also going to have Storm Strike 5 out of 5. And then that's going to feed into having a chance to immobilize enemies. And then we're going to take the vulnerability chance so that when exploit does fall off, Storm Strike can keep vulnerability on the target so that we're constantly getting that 20% multiplicative damage increase. So we definitely want that there as our secondary vulnerability application source. We're going to come down into the core tree. We're not using any core skills or any spenders on this build. So all we're taking here is critical strike chance to close enemies is increased by 6%. And then we're going to take 9% additional move speed while in werewolf form to help us get to that movement speed cap a little bit easier. Down in the defensive tree, we are going to take a couple different things here. So we're going to take Cyclone Armor. We're going to take this for the non-physical damage reduction, so to help us on top of the 70% resistance cap, this 10% is outside of resistances. So of the 30% that gets through, this 10% is applying to that 30% of damage that makes it through, which is another nice reduction on top of the resistance cap that we have when it comes to damage outside of physical attacks. We could turn this into physical as well with an aspect, but we're not going to do that in this build. And then, of course, we're going to take Enhanced Cyclone Armor, which when they're knocked back, they're also slowed, but it's like a secondary application because we are running Hurricane, so this is kind of a non-factor. And then every 10 seconds, Cyclone Armor intensifies, causing incoming damage to grant you 30% damage reduction for 2 seconds. So this is another damage reduction source. We're also going to be using Bloody Howl. Bloody Howl is going to be a constant healing source for us, which is great. Outside of Undying, this is a nice burst heal source. If we take a big hit or a big chunk, Bloody Howl will just pop us right back to full health. We're also going to take, obviously, kills to reduce the cooldown of Bloody Howl. We want it up as often as possible. We're going to be killing a lot of things very quickly. And then Bloody Howl also increases our attack speed by 15% for 4 seconds. So if you've been keeping up with the attack speed numbers, 45% on the base from the amulets for our basic attacks. We have the Claw has its own instilled 15%. We have 10% from boons, so that right there is 70. And then with Bloody Howl up, we're already at 85%. So as soon as Moonrise comes online, we are technically at attack speed cap with just Moonrise. But if there was ever an instance where Moonrise went down for some reason, or we weren't maintaining Bloody Howl, then Ravenous procs and guarantees that we will be at attack speed cap. Theoretically, again, if you find yourself at attack speed cap without Ravenous proccing, you could change Ravenous out for something else, just because we have a ton of different resources for attack speed on this build. But Ravenous is a nice way to just constantly have something keeping you at that attack speed cap on the build. Just a ton of attack speed everywhere this season. We're also going to take 3 out of 3 non-physical resistances by 15%. This is going to, again, help us with, not taking damage from resistances. And then we're going to also take 15% damage reduction for 6 seconds after using a defensive skill. So this is just more damage reduction when we use Bloody Howl or Cyclone Armor. So if you use either one of these, you're going to get an additional 15% damage reduction. You're going to be spamming Bloody Howl all the time. We are going to take absolutely nothing in the companion tree. And then we're going to come down here and we are going to take an elemental exposure to increase our storm skills chance to proc vulnerable. Really, Storm Strike is going to be doing this for us, and Exploit's going to be doing this for us. This is just another potential chance to keep vulnerable online. We're going to take every 8 seconds, a lightning bolt hits a nearby enemy, dealing damage, 45% damage. And actually, I could check something here. Yeah, okay. So we're going to keep this here at 3 out of 3. We're also going to take 3 out of 3 in electric shock. That's going to deal lightning damage to enemies, has a 24% chance to immobilize them. So that comes from Storm Strike or from the lightning bolt that happens every 8 seconds. And that immobilization will be for 3 seconds. And then if the target is already immobilized from either Storm Strike or from this node, then the lightning damage dealt to them is increased by 21% multiplicative. That affects Storm Strike. So Storm Strike will be doing 21% more damage thanks to this node. And then we're going to take 1 out of 3 into Bad Omen, another lucky hit proc that says up to 10% chance when dealing damage to a vulnerable, immobilized, or stunned enemy, since we have a couple different applications there, that a lightning bolt also hits them for some damage. Now, what's important isn't so much this damage number. So the lightning bolt damage here, or the lightning bolt every 8 seconds and the damage here, we're not really looking at these as damage resources. These are really, really important for a different reason, which we'll go deeper into in just a second, but it has to do with the new glyph Electrocution. So what Electrocution does is it says for every 5 willpower purchased within the range, your lightning bolts and dancing bolts deal additional increased damage. You'll see up there, this is a level 15 glyph, and it's currently doing 253% lightning bolt and dancing bolt damage. So those lightning bolts are doing a considerable amount of damage, but where this glyph really steps up is the additional bonus of enemies damaged by your lightning bolts or dancing bolts take 20% multiplicative increased damage for 5 seconds from you, meaning all sources. So our claw damage, which is the 17 out of 5 ranks, is increased by this 20% multiplier. So this 20% multiplier is basically procced as often as this lightning bolt goes off, and as often as this lucky hit chance procs to hit those enemies. So these 2 lightning bolt sources are our source to get that 20% multiplicative. Now, if you are keen, and you notice the time frame here, when we look at this for Electrocution, this is a 5-second uptime. So the 20% multiplicative is up for 5 seconds, and this occurs every 8 seconds, which means we have a 3-second potential gap in window that we don't have the 20% multiplicative. And generally, again, the season of bossing, which is season 2, right? Fighting Duriel, fighting Grigori, fighting Varshan, you essentially only are going to have a 3-second gap ever between having that 20% multiplicative. So that's assuming like this never procs. So if you don't ever get lucky with this lucky hit, this will have a 3-second basically cooldown, and then your 20% multiplicative will be back online. So that's why we are using these. We are also going to take Hurricane. Hurricane is going to help us with survivability. Really, it's the big thing. So it's going to help us slow enemies, and then it's also going to help us take 20% less damage. So it's another damage resource for dealing with the fact that we're going to be in the middle of everything because it is a melee build. We're not going to be at range, which is one of the few drawbacks of the build, is we have to actually be up in close and personal. So Hurricane really helps us keep the damage we take down. And then the big one that I don't think a lot of people are using and taking advantage of, and probably the one factor in my build that you're probably not going to see on anybody else's build, and it's the one factor I think is why you are also not seeing anyone hit for anywhere near the numbers I am hitting for, which is we are going to be using Rabies. Now, Rabies does a couple different things. So Rabies is going to help us not only with our damage, but it's really going to help us with survivability as well. And I'm going to explain why. So Rabies, for those who don't know, is a bite attack. You have to be in melee range, and you bite an enemy. As soon as the enemy is bitten, that enemy will spread poison damage, or I'm sorry, poisoning damage. This is important. The wording is actually important here. Poisoning damage to the enemies around them. So other enemies around you get poisoned. Now, if you're in a melee cluster of 20-30 mobs and you bite one, you want that to spread to all of them as quickly as possible. Why? Well, for the first part is because of Mad Wolf's Glee, we get damage reduction from poisoned enemies. Well, where this really comes into play is what I mentioned before. We don't have a lot of good resources for damage reduction from distant enemies. So what ends up happening is we have all these resources from hurricane damage reduction, close enemy damage reduction, physical armor damage reduction, dealing with being hit by melee attackers, but we only have one source of damage reduction from distant enemies. What Rabies allows us to do is spread this extra 11% poison damage reduction to those distant mobs. So this is a nice way to take this the affix on Mad Wolf's Glee and really make it impactful for the build. Because Rabies will actually spread outward to those at-range mobs, and their damage that they will do to you goes down. So that's why Rabies is really good from a defensive standpoint, but also it's really, really good for damage. So what Rabies we're going to take is poison damage is increased over the lifetime of the disease, dealing 30% times bonus damage. It's a great damage source in of itself. You'll see that the poisoning damage is like 45,000. Like, that's no small potatoes. It actually hits for a decent amount of damage. And then, of course, it gets its own multiplier. But we do not want, this is actually surprising, right? You may be thinking more damage more quick, right? That's the wrong way to think about this. You do not want to think about doing that poisoning damage faster. You actually want that poisoning damage to last as long as possible. We want it to last the full 6 seconds, because the longer the distant mobs and the mobs are poisoned, the less damage they are doing to you, thanks to that 11% additional damage reduction on Mad Wolf's Glee. So we want them to be poisoned. We want them to be poisoned for as long as humanly possible. And we want it to be, you know, you'll see here that we have a 6-second downtime. So the cooldown is 12 seconds, and then it'll be up for 6 seconds. So there's a 6-second gap where the damage reduction will fall off. And by that time, we want everything on the screen to be dead. We want to be moving to the next pack while that's on cooldown. So that's the goal of kind of moving in between and using this. But we do want it to spread as fast as possible, because once we make that initial bite, we want everything around us to instantly get poisoned, so everything is doing 11% less damage, so both distant and close enemies. So that is why we're taking the faster option here, which doesn't make a lot of sense to a lot of people because it's not doing more damage, but it's actually a big defensive thing. But how are we turning this into a massive damage multiplier? Heightened Malice. So while we are surrounded by poisoned enemies, or 3 or more poisoned enemies nearby us, which nearby is actually a very large window in this game. You'll know that if you've used Hemomancy this season, that also says that it damages nearby enemies and it basically off-screens things. So basically it's saying if there's 3 or more poisoned things around you, you're going to do 45% multiplicative more damage. So Rabies is a quick way to make the entire screen around you amp your damage. So just shoots it through the roof. So that is why Rabies is both great for a offensive and a defensive skill to keep us alive and also help us ramp our damage. With that, of course, we're going to take that poison enemies are slowed, but we're going to grab Envenom. An important note about Envenom this season and about your boon over here, Avian Wrath, this season, is the multiplier here was changed. A lot of people didn't know this. If you look at build planners and build guides prior to the launch of Season 2, you will see that the brackets on those build planners on the websites show a multiplicative symbol. That is because it was multiplicative prior to this season. They are now additive damage sources. So the value of Avian Wrath and of Envenom has gone down considerably. They're nowhere near as strong as they used to be. However, it is still one of the best passive nodes for a damage increase for Druids. So even with it being an additive source and it not being that great, it is still one of the best passive damage sources that we have. So we still are going to take it because it's still more damage. It's just not anywhere near as good as it used to be. We're also going to take Toxic Claws, our critical strikes while in Werewolf, are using Werewolf skills, which everything is a Werewolf skill, thanks to, again, Tempest Roar being converted, all our Storm skills to Werewolf skills, and then the fact that we're using Werewolf skills in our Dire Werewolf form. Deal 8% of their bonus damage as poisoning damage over 4 seconds. So this just, again, helps us apply Heightened Malice. This helps us keep Envenom online, and just keeping all of those damage sources active. Right, so that's why this is here. In our ultimate tree, we're obviously going to take Grizzly Rage. We're going to take Grizzly Rage, makes us unstoppable for 6 seconds, and then we're going to gain 8% maximum life as Fortify. This is another great resource for Fortify as well to our Vampiric Power. So our Vampiric Power is helping us with Fortify, and then being in Grizzly Rage is going to help us with Fortify. I will note a small bug here, because this annoyed me, is they changed Grizzly Rage like pre-season 1 to no longer be unstoppable the entire time you're in Grizzly Rage, and they moved it to a 6-second window, which is that modifier that says Grizzly Rage makes you unstoppable for 6 seconds. But for some weird reason, they didn't change the description of Grizzly Rage, and it still reads shapeshift into an unstoppable Dire Werebear, or in our case Werewolf, for 17.5 seconds. That's not accurate. So if you're reading this and you're like, oh, I'm gonna pop Grizzly Rage and I'm gonna be unstoppable for 30 seconds, that actually doesn't work anymore. So Blizzard, fix this, because this is a lie, and it's not how it works anymore. Defiance. So we're going to take 3 out of 3 in Defiance, so that our nature magic skills deal 12% multiplicative increased damage to elites, so more damage to elite mobs, which is great. And then the other change that you will not see in most other builds, but we are going to talk about it here. So normally with a Stormclaw build, you are going to see a Nature's Fury version, which in the Nature's Fury version, you're using a bunch of different things like Shred to proc Lightning Storm, you're using Petrify to proc Cataclysm, or Cataclysm to proc Petrify, or whatever it is, back and forth. There's different things that you can do, especially using Symbiotic, to run a Nature's Fury Crone of the Staff Stormclaw build. You will also see, I think the max roll guide, if I believe, is using Earth and Might. That is another version of this, which does not use Grizzly Rage. And Earth and Might, they are using to basically get the 100% critical strike chance for 5 seconds. So they're basically not fishing for critical strikes on gear. They're taking it where they can, and they're getting a ton of lucky hit to just get 100% critical strike chance through proccing Earth and Might. My problem with this node is there's no value outside of that. We don't need the spirit, and we can get critical strike ourselves. So to me, this in other guides was just a really weak option that I wasn't understanding why so many people were taking this in their builds, because it wasn't really providing much. Just go get critical strike on your affixes on your gear and grab something that actually matters, right? That actually provides damage. And that's why we move here. So Lupine Ferocity, which you will not see very often in builds, but this is an insane node. Every 6th werewolf skill hit, that's werewolf skill, which all of our skills are now werewolf skills, hit, critically strikes, and deals 70% times increased damage, increased to 140% multiplicative against injured enemies. I'm going to let that sink in. Every skill you're doing, Hurricane, Cyclone, Rabies, Claw, Storm Strike, all of it, every 6th hit critically strikes, it's a guarantee, so like Earth and Might, and deals 70% multiplicative increased damage. And then, this is where our big numbers come in. This is the numbers you guys are going to see on the thumbnail, and this is the numbers that people in the Discord have been seeing me post. Once you hit that, like, I think it's like 35% threshold, I think, for injured, you are going to double that multiplicative. It's going to go to 140% damage, and that is when things get bonkers with this build. That's where you're going to see some very big numbers just start happening, right? There's one clip I will show where we hit the injured threshold on Tomb Lord and did 2.5 million damage in a snapshot of a second. So like 0.2 seconds, my 2 claw hits did 2.5 million damage. This ain't your grandma's Stormclaw build. We're not baking cookies over here. So yeah, this is the key factor that I think a lot of people are overlooking this season. They're looking at Earth and Might for the critical strike damage, and they're completely ignoring Lupine Ferocity, which also gives you a 100% critical strike chance. With 200% attack speed, you are ripping off these attacks. I mean, they are happening like every other second. You're just boom, 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 70% multiplicative, where Earth and Might is giving you nothing. Nothing. No value here. This is where the damage is really truly coming from. So Lupine Ferocity is a massive win this season.
Hey guys, just throwing in a quick extra notation here that I forgot to mention in the video, but I wanted to add it at this point. The damage multiplication that you're seeing where we're hitting 1 million to 1.2 million is congruently having everything timed correctly. So as you start to play this build and you start using this build, you're going to understand what I mean. The multiplicative of Lupine Ferocity isn't the only thing that's hitting the 1 million mark. It's everything kind of that has been discussed to this point together. So going into Grizzly Rage and hitting that injured threshold on your boss mob at the same point that your Grizzly Rage is at its max attack power. So when you go into thinking about a fight or thinking about a boss fight, what you want to do is time how fast your initial burst is happening, how much time you're going to have on your Grizzly Rage. So if you really want to see the big numbers and you really want to kind of time everything correctly on like a Duriel fight or a Varshan fight or a Grigori fight or anything like that, you want to, in some cases when I'm doing it, I'll even if I know the boss is going to die within like 5 seconds of me walking in, so like Varshan dying in 5 seconds, I will pop Grizzly Rage before entering, and I will wait a couple seconds to allow Grizzly Rage to get its attack power to that capped threshold, that upper threshold that I showed you earlier in the video. And then I'll go in and I'll pop Bloody Howl for the attack speed to then rush Moonrise, get Moonrise online to get the 20% extra attack speed. So we hit attack speed cap, and I'll blast the boss. During the blasting of the boss to get it to that injured state, the critical strikes that we're doing from the 6th attack being a guaranteed crit and the fact that we have 50% critical strike chance, then that all adds up to that 200% multiplier from the Grizzly Werebeast aspect, right? So you have the 200% critical strike damage multiplier. You then have the max attack power from Grizzly Rage because you waited for it to stack all the way up to the top. So, you know, above the 20,000 attack power point. And then once it hits the injured state, if you've timed everything correctly, you've played it right, when it hits that 35% and the 140% multiplier comes into play, that's when you're going to see the big boy numbers. You can even amplify that further if you can ensure that around you up to 3 things are poisoned. So if the boss has spawned ads, don't rush to kill the ads. Instead, poison the boss with rabies so that the poisoning damage spreads to the ads, and that will give you a 45% multiplicative damage increase. This is really important because that will give you way bigger numbers, right? So you have to get out of kind of like kill everything mode, like murder hobo, and kind of take a step back and say, okay, the boss, like Grigori spawns ads, right? Like Grigori spawns the little Paladin Knight guys. Instead of just rushing to like clear out the Paladin Knight guys, just bite Grigori with rabies, let it spread to the ads, don't worry about them, and that will give you a 45% damage increase. And then again, if you time everything right, you have your Grizzly Rage over 20,000 attack power, you've stacked your critical strike to 200% multiplicative, you're getting heightened Malice's 45% multiplicative, and then you hit that 35% injured threshold or whatever the injured threshold is, you get the 140% multiplier. That's where you're seeing the 1.2 million to 1.5 million damage. And we're going to take it further than that. I'm going for 2 million. I want to see a 2 million base flat crit. That's what I'm going for before the end of the season. But that's how it's happening. It's not every hit is going to be 1.2 million. Every hit's going to be very big. But if you want the pinnacle, you're going for the biggest number you've ever seen using Stormclaw, you have to kind of set it up to kind of take advantage of all these multipliers working together. So I just want to add this notation in because I want to make that very clear, that you'll feel it out. As you play this build, you'll understand kind of what I'm saying is like, okay, I see I have to take advantage of timing a little bit, and then think, again, this is a thinking build as you're playing it, think about your surroundings and say, okay, how can I trigger all my multipliers so that I can hit this boss really, really hard, right? Because what else is there to do in Season 2 besides try to chase really big numbers and just see how big they can be? So just a little step in here for an intermission, and then we'll get back into it.
All right, so that's the skill tree. Now let's talk about the Paragon board. All right, so Paragons. I originally had this as a 7 glyph board. So I had it 1, 2, 3, 4. This was 5, 6, 7. All of these glyphs are online. All of them work. This one worked too. You can see how many points I had here. I had enough to make this glyph socket work. But we changed it to Heightened Malice when I changed to Rabies to give us this extra multiplicative. But yeah, so this is a massive Paragon tree. We take pretty much every board except I think 2 of them. And we're going to come up and essentially we're going to grab damage, of course. And then we're going to come up here and we're going to put in exploit first, right? We need the consistent vulnerability. So this is the easiest way to get consistent vulnerability for the times 20% multiplicative. It will then be supported by Storm Strike and by Hurricane, helping us give vulnerability, as well as the lucky hit chance that a lightning bolt may also give us vulnerability. I have very rarely ever seen an enemy not be vulnerable that I'm attacking, and because our damage is so high, a lot of the trash mobs that we attack just die instantly. One of the things you're gonna, if you start playing this build right from the get-go, that you're gonna be confused on is you're gonna start hitting trash mobs as you're moving through your first Nightmare dungeon. So let's say you have a lot of the gear, right, and you put this together and you run like a Nightmare 70 or something like that as like a test run. You're gonna blow through mobs and you're only gonna see crits for about like 200,000, right? And you're gonna be like, I was told I could hit for 1 million. Well, the problem is the 1 million crits happen if the mob survives the first hit. So the crazy part about this build, you're gonna clear entire screens on your first hit. You're literally just gonna run through mobs, and they're just gonna die as you run past them. You're just gonna claw, everything around you is gonna die. Really, the big hits are gonna come from tanky mobs. So like your big elite boys, your animus carriers, and like your bosses, because then you can get them into the injured state, and that's when you're gonna see some fun times. But for that initial hit, this procs vulnerable on the trash mobs, and you get that 20% multiplier. That's where you're gonna basically clear out trash within a few seconds. You're just going to run through a lot of trash mobs. We're going to come out of the top. We're going to grab the more damage node. And then we're going to shoot up into the Lust for Carnage werewolf board. We are not taking the legendary node. It does us no benefit. We do not need spirit. But we're going to come straight up, and then we're going to cut off here. We're going to grab the more damage node, and then we're going to put in Fang and Claw. Fang and Claw does a couple things for us. One, it's going to make our magic nodes in the area a little bit stronger, which is going to give us healing received benefits and more werewolf skill damage. But more importantly, it's going to give us a 12% multiplicative. It's one of the stronger multiplicatives in the table, and it's while we're in werewolf form, which we are always in werewolf form. We're going to get to the enemies that we're close to, which we're a melee character. So that's all the time, 12% additional damage. Then we're going to offshoot over here in your third board. It's important to know the number that you put your boards in, because it makes the ability to get the bonus requirement of the board easier. The later stage boards, the bonus is harder to get the threshold. So you always want your most valuable rare nodes that you're going to grab to be your earlier boards. So the earlier the board, the more availability that you're going to have to get the bonus. So I believe I made this my third board, and this is also why this is the second board, so that we can also get the extra damage from these nodes down here. So we're going to cut down, we're going to grab the extra werewolf damage and the bonus. We're going to grab all the nodes around here because this is all werewolf damage and critical damage. So we're going to pick up all this extra damage, and then we're going to cut over and we're going to pick up the Inner Beast as our third board. We're going to cut through and we're going to grab Nimble. Again, because it's an earlier board, we're going to pick up that extra attack speed. So we're going to get 5% attack speed plus the extra 2.5. And then we're going to grab a couple extra little attack speed nodes here for another 2.6 attack speed, which again, if you're keeping track, we're now at like, was it 80, 85-ish, 87% base attack speed. So yeah, you're seeing the part where Ravenous may not actually need to be there to be at attack speed cap. I think standing still, what's my base attack speed increase just standing still? Attack speed bonus. 31. Oh, because it's not calculating in the fact that this is only for basic skills. So 31 with the 42, or if you said this was 45, that's 77, right? So 77 just right there is kind of where we're at for our attack speed bonus. So coming back, we're going to cut down. We're going to grab the extra damage from the Shapeshifter rare node, and we're going to grab all the blues around it except for the one on the far side. We're going to cut up and we're going to use the Outmatch glyph. So this one I was actually going back and forth between Fulminate and Outmatch, but I think Outmatch is much better. Again, this is the season of bosses, so this is a higher multiplicative than Fulminate, and we don't actually lose as much additive damage as you may think once this gets to level 25. This is currently level 15, we get a 95% bonus, but at level 21, we actually don't lose a lot of additive damage because we are going to be adding the additive bonus to this number, and that's giving us that additional. So you'll see there the additional 19% shifting skill damage. This number actually goes up to, I think it's 125%. So that 19% is actually going to be up closer to 30%. We don't actually lose a lot from Fulminate to gain a much better multiplicative increase. And Fulminate, I believe, also only affects lightning damage, which Claw is our primary damage source. Stormstrike is secondary. So amplifying Stormstrike really doesn't benefit us for big numbers. This is the much better option. Even though it doesn't affect elite mobs, it will help us drastically clear out trash. And then Duriel, Varshan, Grigori, or map bosses, this is just a massive damage ramp. So that's why we are also grabbing this. And also 19 willpower affects skill damage. So big benefits. We are going to cut over. We're going to grab the armor node here because we are also able to amplify that node from Outmatch. So this is a good source of armor. We're going to get roughly around 500 armor here as well to go towards, again, being able to do higher nightmare dungeons. Then we're going to cut over. We're going to grab the Constricting Tendrils board because it's one of the best pass-through boards in the entire game. You can just cut right through. Here, because it's all high dexterity board, we are going to pick up Spirit in this one, and Spirit is going to increase our critical strike damage, and then that is also going to have a multiplicative to it, which is also going to ramp our critical strike damage. So this is a massive board for increases to our damage, and this at level 21 gets absolutely insane. So the numbers I've put out so far, there's still more on the table. We are not to that damage cap yet because Spirit isn't even near its cap. This is a level 15. We still have 6 more levels to get on this board or on this glyph. We're going to offshoot over here. We're going to grab more damage from Nature's Will. We're going to jump up here. We're going to grab the max life so that we can also grab the dexterity nodes here to add more critical strike damage. And then we're going to get out of this board and jump up to the Heightened Malice board. We're going to cut through Heightened Malice just to grab Heightened Malice. And we're going to grab the Poison Resistance. Remember I said we had Poison Resistance in the Paragon board. So this is where we're picking up that extra 10% Poison Resistance with max life. And then we're going to continue up and we're going to pick up the Thunderstruck board. Pretty much my last board outside of the one that we're going to top out at. And we can just wrap into Thunderstruck. Right, so then we can come up from our werewolf board straight into Thunderstruck and we can pick up the legendary node. We can pick up those extra damage nodes and the extra damage sources. You'll see that we are not getting the bonus. We don't have enough to do the bonus here. But this is a great resource for some extra critical strike damage. And then, of course, Thunderstruck. So Thunderstruck takes your damage versus close and damage versus distance bonuses. Those are from our rings that we talked about earlier. And it gives them a multiplicative increase. So you see here we are at a 47% multiplicative increase thanks to those sources of extra damage on our rings. That is another multiplicative that it gets, increased for our storm skills. You're going to see a lot of big critical strike numbers, both from Storm Strike and Claw. So I talked down Storm Strike a little bit because Storm Strike's not hitting for the 1.2 million, but Storm Strike is still hitting for like 350,000. So that's where you're getting all those additives at the same time when your screen fills up with some big numbers. So then we're going to come up, we're going to grab the Stormcaller for more storm skill damage, and then we're going to cut over. That's where we're going to pick up Electrocution. We talked about this a little bit earlier, so we get that 20% multiplicative. Then we're going to come up, we're going to grab Hubris for the damage reduction to vulnerable enemies. Then we're going to cut up out of this board to our last board, and this is going to be Ancestral Guidance. We're obviously not taking Ancestral Guidance as a legendary node because we're not spending Spirit, so this legendary node is pointless to us. It's just another board that has a really close glyph that we can take advantage of. But also, a little trick about Ancestral Guidance for you guys is the ability to turn this node on if it's a dexterity board is super easy. It's all in this corner, and you don't have to spend a lot of Paragon points to activate a dexterity glyph in this node. So you'll see that we come up, we cut over, we grab the dex node here, the dex node here, we grab all the blues and the yellow, but there's a dex node here, here, and that's enough to activate the board because you have, the one we missed when we're coming in. So we click the one coming in, we click the one above, we click the two blues, and then we click the one to connect to the glyph, and you are already activated just in this little corner. You don't have to stretch over here, you don't have to go all the way over here, you don't have to go all the way up to the top, none of that to get this activated. And of course here, we're taking Territorial. So Territorial is going to be additive damage increase to close enemies, which we're always in close, and it's going to give us that much needed extra damage reduction while we're close to enemies as well. The other benefits of Ancestral Guidance is we can come up and we can grab these extra blue nodes in this rare node, which is going to increase our basic skill damage by a ton. This is probably one of the strongest flat additive nodes in the entire Paragon board for us because it is a massive amp to our basic skill damage. We don't need the bonus because we don't use core skills, but that we will take that plus 35% basic skill damage. We are also going to grab the basic skill damage increase here, which is another 17.5, and then another 17.5. So that is two 35% increases, or if you're doing math, 70% increase basic skill damage. We're hitting with two basic skills. That's a lot. This right here, this cluster, a lot of additive damage. This is great for us. So that's our Paragon board. So some things I wanted to talk to you about. So we've covered the skill tree, the Paragon board, the spirit boons that we're using, the character. There's a build guide in the description below if you guys wanted to take a closer look at that. But now let's talk about some strengths and weaknesses to the build, because there are some. The damage I take from damage over time doesn't adjust. It's still pretty much my entire health bar the moment I get hit by damage over time. And what that looks like for people who don't play Diablo 4 is you don't instantly die. What happens is the red nature to your health bar, the thick redness to it, goes away and it becomes like this misty looking red. And your health basically drops to 0, and then that mistiness kind of drops down. If it reaches the bottom without you healing the deep red back to full, then you die. So what I found to be beneficial is instead of running max life, and again, you can play around with this, again, if you're hardcore and you want to run something like this or test it out, or if you want to make some adjustments, again, all my builds are templates. You can take them and run with them, do what you will. It does not offend me. It's all about making things better, right? Making cool builds, making them better. Is I decided to run damage over time reduction rather than the plus life percentages, because the plus life percentages were really only giving me about 2,500 extra health, but the damage over time reduction was really helping me deal with maps that were heavy on like poison damage or poison enchanted elites. Spiders, especially the small ones, each bite stacks poison damage, and that can get ridiculous very quickly, even with poison resistance cap. Additionally, things like the Duriel fight, which has a ticking poison dot if you get hit by it. I just found that these damage over time reductions were a massive help to staying alive and not getting one shot or not getting one tapped by damage over time. So that is why you were seeing me run purple gems. Additionally, the one flaw that this has versus your Nature's Fury or Cyclone ultimate skill version of Stormclaw is we don't have a great AoE source. So in the other builds you may see on like Maxroll or Moxie's build, I believe, we're using Cyclone to help kind of clear mobs around you, or they go heavy lucky hit to proc a lot of lightning bolts to take out mobs around the edge of big packs. This build doesn't take advantage of that. So one of the hardest things to deal with in this build, which is surprising, are the little trash mobs that have the defender status on them, which is the little shield icon over them. They glow a bright color and they make everything around them take heavily reduced damage. So it's a lot. They're huge damage reduction. And when you pull like a room that has 10 elites in it or 5 to 10 elites in it, and they all get, they surround the one that has the defender status, and it's protecting all of them, it can get really hairy, and you have to kind of play around those situations. I will say this is not a build for, I don't want to say casuals, because it can be depending on the nightmare tier that you're running. It's more active. It's not something where you can sit back and just chuck tornadoes. It's not something where you can sit back and cast lightning storm. It's not something that you can just cast chain lightning at from a range. It's not Hoda that runs in and just AoEs everything within, a 60-yard diameter. It's not Orb Swark or Boulder Druid that has these big wide AoEs that cover, the length around them. You're in the thick of it in every aspect. So you have to kind of play around the situations you get yourself into. For instance, if you run nightmare dungeons that have very narrow hallways or very narrow cave systems, but you get 7 elites in a row down the hallway, you have to actually be actively thinking about that problem. Because Diablo's biggest issue, in my opinion, is the amount of ground effect explosions. So either on death explosions, volcanic explosions, the fire AoE circles from the fire elite mob, the corpse exploding spider mobs, the what's another one? The black thing that follows you and blinds you and instantly kills you if you stand in it for more than 0.2 seconds. I think it's like a drifting shade is what it's called. The Stormbane thing that follows you and covers the entire ground around you if you're in a narrow hallway can be really deadly. You have to be, essentially what I'm trying to tell you in this build is, you will die. I'm just flat out telling you, you will die if you play this with your brain turned off. If you play this with your brain turned off, you're going to die a couple of times here and there. In softcore, just rub it off, keep enjoying the build for what it is, but you have to realize that you have to play around the situations with this build because you are playing a melee build. You are going to be in the thick of it. You're going to have to find ways to get mobs away from the shield mob. So you can use Cyclone Armor to push mobs out of the center so that you can get to the shield mob and kill him. You have to be attentive to know that there's a shield mob or a defender mob in the group and kind of find him and then kind of work your way to get to him. But the cool part is, and probably one of the more satisfying parts of playing it, is once you find that defender mob and you kill him, and then the defender status falls off like 30 to 40 mobs around the defender mob, and you just watch the screen light up in crits, is one of the most satisfying things ever. That's where a lot of the snippets of like the 1 million crits or the 1.2 million crits come from, is because they just numbers go everywhere. And it's such a great feeling, but you can definitely be stopped in your tracks by certain things that happen. It's just definitely a more active playstyle. With that also being said, I would highly advise you to play this build with a controller. This is not a great keyboard and mouse. I should have probably led with this. I will probably circle back and add a notation in the start of this video. that you should not play this build with keyboard and mouse. It is not going to feel good. It is not going to operate good. This is 100% a controller, Steam Deck, something else build, because you're not going to be able to attack and move at the same time with a keyboard. Effectively, you're going to keep having to slam a key or slam your mouse, and it's not efficient, and it's not going to keep you alive, and you're going to die a lot. I use an Xbox controller, and basically how I play this build is I proc all my cooldowns, except for rabies, of course. Hold down X and just blitz through a dungeon. If I come up to a big pack or one with a defender mob and I know I'm going to have to stop and kind of work my way through the giant pack, then I will rabies so that I can get heightened malice, and then I will again start just massacring things around. You will also find with this build that you are exceptionally tanky. I probably put some clips in here of me fighting the Butcher. You can just stand there with the Butcher and just square off, right? Face tank him and go back and forth. But the Butcher is very strong. He does lifesteal on hit. He has a massive shield. He has a lot of physical damage reduction, which claws physical damage. If you guys didn't know that, claws physical damage, which means that the Butcher doesn't die instantly like he would with, like, again, an orb build or a boulder build or a lightning strike build. That's not going to be the case with this, but you do not have to fear the Butcher. You can literally just tank him. Now, I haven't fought a 150 Butcher yet. Again, if I do run into one, I plan on trying to face tank him and see how it goes. But I have fought a 139 Butcher, which I can't imagine he's going to skyrocket in difficulty over the course of 11 levels. And I found myself in zero danger the entire time. I literally just stood there, hold X on my controller, and just swiped through him and eventually just blew him up. Recently, he's gotten a lot easier as the damage has also been ramping up. So with that said, again, just a rolling look at the stats, we are going to have capped resistances if you use the magic elixir. We are going to have capped attack speed. We're going to have... Oh, we didn't really talk about this. So before the close damage increase in skills... And the additionals, critical strike chance that we're getting from other resources, we're at 40.2%. This is roughly around 50%. And then again, every 6th attack is 100%. So we are very rarely not critting. And that's a big factor. So crit chance is very high. Everything is feeding into getting that 6th attack that is 100% crit chance. And then every other attack that we're doing to feed to that 6% has a 50% chance to crit. Again, you're going to see some white numbers, but they're very few and far between. And again, you're going to see some big numbers happen a lot. We have 447% crit damage. We have 300% overpower damage. We have 108% all damage. We have a bunch of different damage sources here. Damage to basic is increased, damage while in werewolf, damage while shape-shifting, damage to close, damage to distant, damage versus crowd controlled. Is there really 2 versions of damage while shape-shifted? Did I see that, or am I losing it? No, damage with shape-shifting, damage while shape-shifted. Blizzard. Alright. We're running 0 thorns. We have about 12,000 life. This could be higher. This could probably be closer to 14,000, 15,000 if we rolled life on ring. I grabbed a couple other sources that we could grab for life. We have 6,583 base armor. And we have well over, let me see if I can show you kind of what our armor actually is. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it with these mobs here. But essentially our armor's like 15,000, 16,000 with disobedience. From a 6,583 base. Obviously, we're getting that from a 54% increase to while we're wearing in werewolf form. All damage reduction 10 DOT, so this is from our gems. Dot damage reduction 34.1%. Damage reduction from elites from our boons. Damage reduction from vulnerable. Damage reduction from close. Damage reduction from distant. Damage reduction from poisoned enemies, which comes from rabies and our own claw attacks. And then our dodge chance 4.3%. We have 120% maximum spirit. We have 155 base move speed. So essentially, anytime that Ghostwalkers is up and anytime that we kill an elite, you're going to be moving at 200% move speed the entire time. We are a very fast way. Oh, and of course, while you're in Dire Werewolf. So if we proc Dire Werewolf, you're 200% move speed. So while you're Dire Werewolf, you are a fasty boy who kills many things. Oh, there you go. 15,546 armor is our capped armor. So 15,546 armor, 200% move speed while in Dire Werewolf. If Ghostwalkers procs outside of Dire Werewolf, you're at 180% move speed. You're fast, your capped attack speed, yeah, you hit really, really hard. So, as always, if you have any questions, comment below or find me on Woody's Discord in the Druid channel. This will probably be the last build that I do this season, as I have some other things I have to take care of. But yeah, I love this build. I love the damage it does. I think it's insane. I think you guys will really enjoy it. Again, I would not recommend doing this in hardcore without making some adjustments for your survivability. But if you're a softcore person and you just really want to blast and hit some really big Stormclaws, this is 100% the way to do it. So enjoy, guys. Have a blast. If you have any recommendations to make the build better, of course, I do not take offense to criticism or backseating my theories. You can always come in and talk to me in the Woody Discord and say, hey, have you tried X, or have you considered X, Y, and Z to increase your damage? I think I've done a really good job to get where we're at, but of course, if someone has something that I've never thought of, by all means, tell me. I will test it, and we will see if the numbers can go even bigger. I have to get all my glyphs to 21, so we are not at the capped threshold yet. We have hit a 1,000,000 base crit attack, and we have hit a 1.2 million overpower attack so far. So I'm intending to push that much further. I want to get it closer to 2 million. So it is a work in progress, and I think we can get it very, very, very close, if not over 2 million. So thanks, guys. This is a really long one. I hope you guys enjoyed. Short version, go to the description and just read the planner. But if you really want the insights, I appreciate you guys listening in. Have a good one.